Good evening and welcome. Today, this is our very first town hall in 2021 and then first one being done during the administration. We're super excited to have you. So without further ado, I just want to quickly introduce myself and then I'll be bringing in Executive Directors of Stand Up Republic, Evan McMullin and Mindy Finn. I'm Mariana Mancuso, I'm the Media Manager at Stand Up Republic. And tonight we'll be hearing from both Evan and Mindy about the way forward and how we can protect democracy together.
Thank you, Mariana. Welcome, everybody. We are so happy to see you all. It has been quite an eventful few weeks, to say the least. Obviously, there was the election counting. Actually, we learned results fairly quickly, but it felt like a long time. And the post-election period was quite chaotic compared to past elections, given that Donald Trump refused to concede and it wasn't a normal transition. And then, obviously the events on January 6th at the Capitol really rattled the nation and rattled all of us who have been concerned about threats to our democracy. And then yesterday, it really culminated, though, in this, long storied tradition that we've been able to count on as Americans with the peaceful transition of power from one administration to the next. And while it was an unusual one, given that we're amid a pandemic, we still, while some traditions went by the wayside, we still were able to enjoy watching, for the most part, both parties coming together to that inauguration. Three former presidents, they're recording a video expressing their support for the new president, and really a celebration of America and a celebration of the work that we all need to do together to renew the Americans back on track and build back better, as Joe Biden says. We wanted to bring you all together for this first town hall because we feel like this is really a pivotal moment, obviously for our country, but a pivotal moment for Stand Up Republic and the community who has been with us from the very beginning. For much of our first chapter, if we could call it that, the last 4 years, we've been focused on, we always said we wanted to defend and strengthen American democracy, but for the last 4 years, much of that effort needed to go into defending American democracy and defending American democracy from this threat that is Donald Trump. And now we head into, to a new phase. There is still cleanup work to do. I would say there's quite a lot of cleanup work to do. Part of that is we know due to the insurrection that the House impeached Donald Trump for the second time. And now, the job really falls to the Senate, decide to try him and decide whether they will convict. That is important work. We at Stand Up Republic are calling for them to do it. We have calls to action that hopefully you've seen on our social media and on our website. We do encourage you to please do that. We are as eager as anybody to help support this next phase, this post-Trump phase. But we believe that, it is really, really important that the precedent is set. We talk about precedent, that the precedent is set, not president, that you can't have the chief executive of the United States inciting an insurrection, and violence and one that killed people and not be held accountable. And so we are pushing that action and we encourage you to take it. We believe that Trump, not only Trump, but also his enablers must be held accountable for this attack. And that accountability, will be ongoing and it'll be something we continue to focus on at Stand Up Republic. So please do take that action. With that, I'm going to, obviously have a time to discuss more later. Really look forward to, more than anything in this conversation, taking your questions. Appreciate you taking the time to join us. Thank you for all of you that have submitted questions. We really look forward to engaging in the discussion. And with that, I'll turn it over to Evan.
Well, thank you, Mindy, very much. And thank you all for joining us. And most importantly, thank you for all the last four and a half years. Many of you have been with us for that long, working with us in 2016 and then in Stand Up Republic since then. Others have joined more recently. We say welcome to you too. Some, I think, are starting to join us even very recently after the events of January 6th. Of course, a lot of people are starting to look for something new, and we welcome you as well. And it's such a pleasure to be able to speak with you. There may be people who are joining us in this town hall who have different views about, or maybe in the past had different views about what should have happened in this last election. Obviously, we fought very hard to replace the president and to elect a unifying alternative, even if it wasn't, someone of our own party. We've got people who are a part of Stand Up Republic, or Republicans, Democrats, and Independents. But I think collectively we understood that we needed to go in a new direction, and we fought very hard to get a more unifying replacement to Trump, even though we will continue to have policies. We were committed to having a leader committed to our Constitution, the rule of law, and to truth and decency, and so many other things that are necessary for our democracy to function. So we now think about having finished that. We now need to think about what's next for us. What's next for our work? We saw in this election that President Biden won with a significant margin, but at the same time, still about 74 million Americans voted for President Trump, even after a lot of warning signs. And again, some have come to the conclusion that they've changed their views on him very recently, which is tremendous. But I think the fact that Biden won, but Trump still attracted so many votes, begs the question: what are we going to do to build an even bigger movement to protect and improve our democratic republic? We've spent the last 4 years with you working to unite people from across the political spectrum. We've done that. We did that. We built this large democracy movement that supported the replacement of President Trump in a new direction for the country. But having done that, we realized that maybe it needs to be, this democracy movement in the United States needs to be a bit bigger, because the win wasn't as large as we hoped it might be. And so the question now is, what do we do to bring aboard the next set of people to the democracy movement, especially in the Republican Party, where there's the most work to be done? And the good news is that, as horrible as the insurrection was on January 6th, it created an awareness, an awakening, I think, among many people about what Trump was all about and what Trumpism was all about. And so, without impugning or judging people's decisions from the past, which is not always a worthwhile exercise, we do have an opportunity, I think, to make a case to more Republicans that they should join this cross-partisan coalition for our country, putting the nation's interests above those of the parties. How do we do that? We're convinced that the way to do that is probably to give Republicans who are eager for a new direction something new to associate with. Whether, some people think it should be a new party, other people think it should be a party within a party that seeks to influence and ultimately direct and lead the Republican Party in a new direction. That's a discussion that we'll have probably more tonight with your questions. We've seen some of them very excellent, so we'll be talking about that. But there's also a middle ground, and that is that we continue where we build a space for those Republicans looking for something new that they can affiliate with, but something that's familiar enough to them that they're comfortable with it, but new enough that it embraces democracy in a new way forward for our country and hopefully the Republican Party. So we'll talk more about that. But what are we going to do with this democracy movement and this cross-partisan coalition that we've built together with you and with our partner organizations over the last 4 years? What are we going to do with that? We say we want to grow it. That's important, bringing more people from the Republican Party. But then what should it do? It should do a few things. Number one, I think that we've got to ensure that we continue to play a role in elections across the country, to elect honorable, unifying, effective leaders. We've seen who our leaders are, especially in the last couple of weeks. Some supporting this insurrection, others opposing it, making principled stands, crossing party lines, or working to unite others across party lines. We've really seen who are the good leaders and who are not. So we're going to continue to we need to hold people accountable going forward and elect good leaders. And that may mean that, we support new people, challenging some of these people in primaries and the new elections or in the general elections. Some of those people may be you, in fact. But we've got to continue to elect good leaders and to hold accountable those who have damaged the republic. The other thing I would say that we believe we need to do is advance reforms, political reforms that strengthen the institutions of our democracy, whether it's the independence of law enforcement or reforming the Vacancies Act so a corrupt president can't put unqualified cronies in charge of significant government departments and then abuse power that way. There are a range of reforms that need to happen at the federal level. We also need to advance electoral reforms across the country that increase, that empower voters and that inspire more unifying, effective leadership. Reforms that give voters more choice. For example, open primaries, ranked choice voting, independent redistricting, all of those things are important, and others. And then lastly, I think that this democracy movement that has fought so hard to protect the republic over the last 4 years, uniting people around our ideals, norms, and institutions, the next step that we have to take is to advance real solutions for the American people, unifying solutions that are supported by reason and fact and our values. We've had an absence of that in many cases over the last 4 years, but now the democracy movement is in charge. We took the presidency collectively, and again, it may be on a cross-partisan basis. Not all of us are Democrats, but we have a Democratic president, but he is someone who has pledged to strengthen our democracy, to defend it and strengthen it. Part of that is proving to the American people and those who are skeptical of our system of self-government, proving to them that it can deliver results to modern challenges. And the way to do that is for us to continue to work across party lines and support unifying solutions, not partisan divisive solutions, but again, unifying solutions that are supported by fact, by reason, and by our values. So those are the things when we think about our future, our future work, with you, those are the major things that come to mind. And so with that, Mariana, we would love to go to questions and hear from those who are participating and those who have submitted questions already.
Thank you so much, Evan and Mindy. This is fantastic. And I'm super excited to have everyone here watching right now. So we want to get into some of the questions. There have been so many questions that have been submitted over the past week for this town hall, and I can't wait. So let's just kick it off, guys. I don't even know where to begin, but we're just going to dive right in. And one question that I've seen from all sorts of people in various forms has been the question about if the Republican Party, can it be saved in time for 2022, 2024? And if people agree with where you guys land on issues in terms of Stand Up Republic, do you think that there's a path forward for the Republican Party, or can it be reformed? Or last but not least, do we just have to form a brand new party? So with that, I'm going to let Evan and Mindy take it away.
Mindy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so, I can start on that question. So I think this question of can the Republican Party be saved is quite an interesting one. I think it really kind of depends on what we mean by saved first and foremost. Not to treat this like a lawyer and parse apart words, but I think for some people who are just thinking politically and thinking about political victories, they think, can we win again? The reality is that Donald Trump, the party thought Donald Trump was good for them. They won in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. They, won since then in places in special elections they didn't expect. They lost in some places, but they were, if you're a party person and you're just thinking about winning, which is a big thing that the party has just become about, it's really just about winning and power. They started to think Donald Trump was good for them, and it's why they aligned with him. He helped to raise a lot of money because he would really fire up his base, and his base was very committed to him, and he brought out new voters that previously, sat out elections. So I think when we're thinking about it politically, I think that's one question. But when I think about, and I think when a lot of our community asks, can it be saved? They mean, is this a party that can be pulled away from authoritarian populism and extremism and demagoguery and lies? Is this a party that can stand for truth and equality and true liberty and actual ideas and solutions again? Is this a party that, and I know this is debatable among people, but it really is a party that has come to largely represent kind of white grievance, or just be more regionally strong as opposed to nationally strong. And so if you're thinking about it, can this be a party that can embrace all people and be a pluralistic party? Then I think that really is an open question. And the work that we do, us and other organizations, and the events of the next few years, I think will really help us answer that question. The facts of the matter are, and granted, Trump just left office yesterday. I mean, we're in a period of time where information travels so quickly that minds can change much more quickly than they could in previous generations. So I think it's a little early to say that Trump is going to remain this strong leader within the party and his loyalists will stick with him. I think it's a little early to say. But the reality is that Trump installed a lot of his base throughout the party organization. State parties around the country are led by kind of the most Trumpist type of leaders, the people who want to expunge pro-democracy people from their ranks. I mean, they actually don't really care about being a minority party. They just want to get rid of people who, might not be loyal to Trump and demagoguery and Trumpism. So he has a strong hold on the party. He has a strong hold on raising money and donors, and not just him, but his people. I think it really, there was a major moment, kind of a moment in history that I think will really come to define, maybe a proxy for the direction of the party, for good or ill. And that was when Congress came back in session on January 6th to vote to certify the election results and to certify that Joe Biden won the election. And the Senate, the majority of Republican senators voted to certify those results. Mitch McConnell gave a speech saying they should certify those results. And the House, on the other hand, 2/3 of the House Republican caucus voted not to certify those results. And the House, tends to always be kind of further to the right than the Senate anyway. But it's, the House is supposed to reflect the people. It really reflects their voters, and they're the ones that are up for re-election, all in 2 years. I think whether that turns out to be a decision that reflects the future of the party going forward, or whether that becomes a decision that really sealed their fate as the Trumpist wing's fate as the past in the Republican Party, I think really will be, that will tell us a lot about where we're headed. I will just kind of end with, and I want to turn it over to Evan, but right now, I personally would say the odds are stacked against the pro-democracy, pro-equality forces within, pro-truth forces within the Republican Party to be able to become the majority in the party and be the leaders of the party. But that's if we just sit back and kind of let it happen. I think that really speaks to why organizing and building political power for the pro-democracy, evidence-based, pro-truth, pro-equality wing and real liberty wing of the Republican Party and of the conservative movement is so critically important. Because if we don't do that, we just sort of allow the Republican Party to become, I would say, kind of a toxic, mix of demagogues and of people who are dangerous, and the types of people who can incite the violence that we saw and will incite the violence that we saw on January 6th or worse. And I guess the last thing I would say is, if the party can't be reformed, then we won't be able to just sit by and allow that kind of party to be one of the major, political forces in our country. We will have to compete with it, and that would probably involve starting a new party.
Yeah, and to that point, Mindy, there's some that say, look, we should, those of us who have been, who were a part of the Republican Party and then have been sort of put away by the last 4 years. Some say, look, you should just go join the Democrats and become officially a part of the party. Some are doing that. Some have done that. Look, I think that is, that's a decision that some people are going to make. I understand it. Certainly, we have worked together across party lines to protect the country over the last 4 years. We should continue to do that. But we can't, to Mindy's last point, we can't just allow a party. We have two major parties in this country. That's not likely to change anytime soon. We can't just allow one of those major parties to become anti-democracy without, being checked. We can't, or replaced. We just can't afford to not do that. And someone has to do that work. And so, that's work that we think, we and others like us and in this broader democracy movement, that's work that we should take on. If not us, then who will do it? I will say that, we are a two-party system. I wish that weren't the case. I'd like to see that change. I've said that for 4 years plus now. But, we are a two-party system. And so a party can really go off the rails in the United States and still have an opportunity to get back to sanity, an opportunity that it maybe doesn't deserve and that wouldn't have if we were a multi-party system. But, we have two major parties right now. The rules of the system are set up so that that's unlikely to change. And so there's really the way to think about it in some ways is that the two parties are vessels that, can be controlled by one group or another group. And yes, there's a competition between the two parties, but there's also a competition for control of the parties. And so, that's an effort we should make, and collectively, and I mean, as all Americans, we should try to pull the Republican Party back from the extreme corners that it has found, that it has taken itself. But if we cannot succeed, then we're going to have no choice but to start something new. We're having conversations with members of Congress that are really incredible, where even members of Congress are saying we need something new, and they're open to something new within the Republican Party, and others are open to starting a new party altogether. And it's really incredible. These are sitting members of Congress that are saying these things, not publicly, but to us, and increasingly they will be saying these things publicly. And so, there's a real opportunity. But whether you believe that there should be a new party right away or soon, or you believe that the most prudent thing to do is to start a party within a party and fight over the course of, probably several years to take control of the Republican Party and to reform it, regardless of which camp you are on that, the next steps are the same. We need to help, build a home, for Republicans and conservatives who are committed to democracy, whether it's been that way for 4 years or whether they're new to this effort, that's fine. But we need to build another home that can compete with the Republican Party, either within it or outside of it. That's what we're calling for, and we're taking some of those next steps, which I think you'll hear more about, and we'll talk more about with you as we go. But that's kind of the way we see it now.
Do you have other questions?
Yes, that is fantastic. And I love the explanation. I think that really sheds a lot of light on just overall what the direction is forward for the Republican Party, those that are members, those that have left the party, those that are just finding themselves politically homeless. The next group of questions that we want to tackle tonight is actually regarding electoral reform advancement. And, Adam asked a question. He said, how can we best expand approval voting or ranked choice voting to avoid another 2016? And then Laura followed up and said, what can citizens do to support electoral reform? So, Mindy, why don't you take it away with that?
Yeah, sure. So, the question is about electoral reform. And, I presume that many people who have joined us tonight understand what that means. But just briefly, in case some are wondering, what exactly is electoral reform, or some people call it political reform? They are the reforms to our electoral system, usually aimed at making sure that the system is more representative, that it's giving voice to more voters, so that the people that get elected, are truly working on behalf of, more, all or most of the constituents. It's meant to improve that. It's meant to make it more representative. And that's why, we tend to think of it as good for democracy or more democratic. In terms of ranked choice voting, a lot of what we just talked about whether we can build a new party or we can build a healthier movement or faction within the Republican Party to ultimately compete and force the extremists, into the sidelines. A lot of that actually, I think, does depend on electoral reforms. There is a primary problem, and by primary I don't mean first and foremost problem. I mean political primaries, in that whoever wins the primary due to gender gerrymandering, whoever wins the primary in many districts, automatically, is going to win the general election unless they drop out or something other, more extreme happens. And often those who vote in the primaries, first of all, primaries are closed just to those who are identified with the party. They're your most loyal, your most engaged, your most active voters. And then there's multiple candidates in a primary. And so the person who may end up winning it really may only get the backing of a very small slice of the base, and really very often a small slice of the extreme base, in order to win that primary. And then they get to Congress. And we have many examples right now in Congress of this happening. I mean, I don't know if you are all familiar with Lauren Boebert, who is a congresswoman from Colorado, I think the 3rd district. Her district is actually a pretty moderate district, one might say, like only slightly more Republican than Democratic. But she was able to win a primary with multiple candidates. And she's the one who was, created that video about carrying her gun to the Capitol despite not being allowed to. Clearly, she was inciting the insurrection. She said a whole lot of really dangerous things since she's been in office, and really challenged a lot of the rules that are meant to protect those in the House. And so this, I think, that just highlights the problem. RCV, I think, was the question. How do we pass ranked choice voting to avoid another 2016? I think that's how do we avoid, if ranked choice voting was used in the presidential primary in 2016, I think the assumption is that Donald Trump would not have won. He only ever, won to support a third of Republicans. I hope that would have been the case. It is, RCV is the ranked choice voting. It is in place in a couple states now. It just passed in Alaska for all of their elections, for their primaries, or for, top 4 candidates in a primary go to the general, and then they're chosen in ranked choice voting. It's the law in Maine. Some conventions use it, even Republicans or Republicans use it in their party conventions. But there's a lot of work to pass it more widespread. We think that's important work as Stand Up Republic. We are looking at, certainly helping support efforts to advance RCV in states across the country, and to go in really deep and big in a couple places this year, in particular to address that primary problem, that problem of changing the incentives, in the primaries, so that once candidates, you've heard, Donald Trump threatened, and his family threatened those who might have voted to certify the election results, that they will be primaried. They will primary them. That type of threat doesn't hold the same kind of weight in a system where there's an open primary with ranked choice voting. In terms of what an individual can do to get involved, I mean, I think you're kind of doing it. I would say stay involved with Stand Up Republic. This is something we've long cared about and focused on, and taken some steps to help advance in some places. We plan to double down on that this year. We work with a host of partners who are also advancing these reforms. I think that really is the best thing. I think the second thing is just to continue to read as much as you can and get educated on the arguments for it. And we will help do that too, distribute messaging so that you can help spread the word in your communities, particularly to your elected officials and others who are in positions of influence, to help sell them really on the benefits of this reform, and that it can help get more consensus, solutions-oriented candidates elected, so that government works better and ultimately people are more satisfied, and we no longer have the breeding ground, for extremist movements and populist authoritarianism, so that we ensure the stability of our democracy in our country.
And I would just add to that, and I agree with what Mindy said. But if you're sitting out there wondering, I'm sitting in the state where I don't know if there will be a ranked choice voting or an open primary or some other electoral reform initiative to support. Look, there may be, and if there is, certainly you can. That's easy, right? You can get on board with that and support it, volunteer, donate to it, et cetera. Offer your expertise and talents. But if you find yourself in a state where there isn't an electoral reform effort, the other thing you can do is look around the country and find a state where there is an electoral reform effort and get involved anyway. Even if you don't live in that state, you can still volunteer. You can still spread the word. You can still, I mean, look, we're all hiding out in our homes these days, or many of us, because of the pandemic. And either way, we're engaging with family and friends from a distance digitally. And that's the new way of the world, at least for now. One silver lining is that, it means that you can engage to advance a campaign in some other state just as well as somebody who's actually living in the state. And we're going to have to act that way because, there are a lot of us, but there aren't so many of us that we can afford to, not act together. When we've got an initiative in state X, even though we may live in a variety, spread out all over the country, we need to all jump on that and help advance that. And you can do that. And there will be those reform initiatives. We'll be backing, at least a couple of those in this next cycle. We certainly will want your support. But the last thing I would say is that, some of these reform efforts sometimes start with a Facebook page. Somebody just like you may not have a public platform. It's okay. Don't underestimate the impact you can have. There are stories about people who have not been involved in politics, but who realize, okay, we've got to fix this problem. And they realize some electoral reform is the answer in their state. And they start a Facebook page. And then all of a sudden they've got, 100 people joining, and then 200, and then 2,000, and then it's 50,000. And then all of a sudden, national donors come in and campaign experts, and all of a sudden they've got a real campaign. So, you can get started wherever you are in spreading the word about these reforms. I think Mindy and I and the team at Stand Up Republic, we're partial to opening up the primary system. We want to see primaries that are, open in the sense that Republicans, Democrats, third-party candidates all compete in the same primary, and then the top 4 or 5 continue on to the general election, and then there's ranked choice voting to ensure that whoever wins is actually the candidate that has the most support. And if we do that, then we strengthen the voice of those in the middle who are seeking solutions and a healthy republic. And we inspire more unifying, effective leadership. But that's what we can all do these things in different ways, but we can all do them.
Thank you guys so much. I don't know about you, but I am so excited to get started. I think I'm going to go start a Facebook group tonight about this. But before we move on, I want to just briefly touch on that Sally asked a really interesting question. She wanted to know, how do we promote increased voter rights rather than voter suppression and reduction in gerrymandering to create safe districts? Evan, do you want to handle this one first, or should we give it to Mindy?
Well, I guess it's my turn to go first. That's, it's... Look, we need the Republican Party. We need both parties to have confidence in their ideas, so much so that they don't feel like they shouldn't. Obviously, they should never turn to voter suppression or gerrymandering. Those are un-American tactics, but they're used across the country. Gerrymandering by both parties, but especially by the modern Republican Party. Voter suppression, especially by the Republican Party. And, it's sad for the whole country and obviously very dangerous and un-American. But at the root of this is an acknowledgement indirectly that, if you're the Republican Party and you're depending on voter suppression and gerrymandering, it's not a very strong, you're not signaling much confidence in your own ideas, right? I mean, you're basically saying my ideas aren't competitive. They can't compete, and I can't compete. My leadership isn't appealing enough and worth enough to sort of compete free and fair in elections. And so I've got to take these other steps. which is the wrong approach, obviously. But what I would say to, my Republican friends is that, hey, let's recommit to our founding ideals. That's something we've been talking about for a long time. Some are realizing the wisdom of that now. That's wonderful. We invite all to the cause. Recommit to our founding ideals, recommit to truth, recommit to decency. And if we do that, if the Republican Party will do that, I'm convinced that it can offer competing solutions and ideas that will make it competitive in free and fair elections. And that's the way to go. That's a sustainable path to leadership in the country. What isn't sustainable is telling people, is working so hard to make sure people, your opponents, won't vote. And we even have I think there was a local Republican official in Georgia who, over the past week, some of you have probably seen this on Twitter, it flew past my eyes at one point, but where he or she actually said explicitly, as we've seen happen increasingly, hey, we've got to change the rules so that not as many people can vote, otherwise we just have no chance of winning. And of course, that's just un-American. It's crazy that these things are even being said aloud, but perhaps it's good that now we have these things out in the open, on the table, and we can just discuss them, openly and deal with them. But I think the root of the issue is recommitting to our values, our core national values: liberty, equality, justice, truth, recommitting to those ideas, recommitting to truth and reason, recommitting to decency. And that's how any political party can compete in America. That is the recipe. And so we've got to continue. What we can do is continue to support leaders who do that, both on the Republican side and the Democratic side, and hold accountable through elections those who don't. And we've got to do it. And then, of course, the other thing is we've just got to fight for reforms like independent redistricting, like open primaries of the kind that I described, and that support Stand Up for Republic. But these are the things we've got to do. But we've got to act. I just want to say once again, we need to act together across the country. There will be reform initiatives on the ballot in the next cycle in 2022. We need to dogpile on those efforts, all of us across the country. Something may be happening in Arizona or Utah or New Hampshire or wherever. I'm just naming states. No one should read too much into those, although we do look at Arizona and Utah a lot. But something may be happening on the other side of the country. My point is that let's all collectively take ownership of that, get involved, and make it a success. And we'll just keep rolling. And if it takes, I hope it doesn't take 10 years to get it all done. But if it does, so be it. Like, this is our fight, and it's for the Republic, and other generations that have gone before us have sacrificed a whole lot more. And in this fight, it's a privilege to be able to fight for these things. And in that fight, we understand more about ourselves as human beings, as Americans, and more about this great country. So anyway, we just have to be persistent and keep the fight on, probably for some time to come, state by state.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add on that. I mean, trust in elections and our elections is just so critically important. I mean, we must have free and fair elections if we are to continue to exist as a democracy. And that's why what happened in 2020 was so critically important. I mean, I think it should not be lost on us that amid a global pandemic, we had an entire national election infrastructure, which actually isn't national. I mean, it is municipality by municipality and county by county and state by state, adapting the election infrastructure to ensure that people could vote even amid a pandemic, and to do so safely. And some places did better than others, but that was a gargantuan effort, and it was a successful one. So 80, more people turned out in this election than in any other election. Donald Trump likes to talk about how he broke records because previously you had only had 70 million votes for a presidential candidate, which was him in 2016, and he got 74 this time. But Joe Biden got 81 million votes. I mean, it was just historical turnout. And, part of that was obviously there were many factors, and we don't know all of them, but some of them are the pandemic, and we were in this crisis, and it highlighted for people, underscored how important governance is. Obviously, Donald Trump's unpopularity and the backlash against him, the desire to vote for Joe Biden, but also a big piece, I think, of that turnout was it expanded voting options and voting access. And this is something that a lot of people have been working on for a long time, is to get states to expand those options, to make it more convenient. More early in-person voting, vote by mail, vote by mail access. Some states moving to almost universal vote by mail. More states doing that. This time, many states opening that up for the pandemic. That opening up, which a lot of states did really in response to the pandemic, did yield this very high participation. That is something we must celebrate. We must celebrate that across party lines. I think one thing that will be a fight, obviously for redistricting and all of that, but there will be fights within legislatures this year to try to roll back, of some Republicans trying to roll back that voting access because they didn't do as well in this past election, and Donald Trump didn't win, and obviously then in the Georgia runoff, Democrats narrowly took the Senate when they won those 2 Senate seats. I think not only would that be the absolute wrong thing to do, it's just totally un-American. It also, as Evan said, it's not the way to build constructively a political party. You should win on your ideas. You shouldn't try to suppress. They should just lean into trying to turn out even more voters and persuade more voters in this election. The reality is that Republicans picked up seats in the House in this election, even with expanded vote by mail. Many red states went to almost universal vote by mail because of this election. And obviously Republicans did well in those states. Expanded access to voting rights and voting access should not be a partisan issue. It's not a partisan issue. Running safe, secure, free, and fair elections is not a partisan issue. It's an American issue. And that is a fight that is worth having. Specifically, pay attention to what's happening locally. Pay attention to what's happening in your legislature and among electoral commissions, and as they're debating these issues, because those are starting to happen now. And you should raise your voice and you should speak out and you should be part of making sure it's heard that we need expanded and continued access to voting. More turnout is better for democracy and better for America.
I completely agree with both you, Mindy, and Evan about this. And, as we head into the final few minutes of this, I've got just 2 final questions, but let's just first lead with my second to last question, which comes from Kristen. And she's asking, as leaders who don't lead people astray, you and Mindy, Evan, what plans do you have to hold accountable for fellow conservative lawmakers, attorney generals, GOP party leaders, etc., on all levels of government for their lying, their acts, whether what took place on the 6th of January, or just in general of them deliberately misleading the American public? So, Mindy, why don't you kick us off with that?
Yeah, so, in order to create political change, to force political change, I think, we're all familiar with the carrot and the stick approach. There's you either reward good behavior or you punish bad behavior. What happened on January 6th, I think, is an opportunity to make very clear who deserves that reward and who deserves that punishment. In terms of reward, it's worth highlighting that not enough, but there was a cohort of Republican members of the House who went against their caucus and voted to certify the results. That was about a third of the caucus. Even kind of more courageous, there was nearly a dozen that stood up and decided to vote with Democrats to impeach Donald Trump, making that the most bipartisan impeachment that we have ever had in our history. The most members of the House who have ever stood up to impeach the president of their own party. We often kind of fall into the place of wanting there to be, more, and we certainly want to be more. We think all of them. It was obvious they all should have voted that way. But I think it's worth noting that it was the most bipartisan impeachment vote that we've ever had. Those who did that, certainly they're going to they're already facing some fire. They're facing some heat from the Trumpist wing. They need the carrot. They need our support. They need our donations. They need us to, make calls for them when it's time. They need us, if we know voters in their district, do everything we can to turn out votes for them. It's going to be, could be difficult for them. I hope it's not, but it could be. The Senate, the same thing. We have the list. We know those who voted, from our perspective, the right way, and those who voted the anti-democratic, un-American way. Anybody who did that obviously shouldn't get support. At Stand Up Republic, we will engage in elections, and some of that engagement will continue to be the stick. It will be working hard to defeat those who, really threaten the republic, and people who voted not to certify the election results fall into that category. Certainly those who incited the insurrection definitely fall into the category, like people like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz. For example, some of the prominent, I don't even want to call them leaders, but prominent elected officials, politicians who took that stance, they deserve the stick. But I think on the other hand, what we really do hope to do is we want to get out of this cycle of the toxic, being politics of division, where everything is about negative partisanship, and it's all just about supporting people because they're a better alternative to the worst option on the other side, and instead to really build and create a new generation of leadership. So as much as we'll still engage in the stick, part of it is going to be identifying and building more political power for the new conservative wing, the pragmatists, the pro-liberty, the pro-democracy side. It will be identifying and elevating leaders to run and win, who can be more in the mold of the Peter Myers in Michigan, who's doing the right thing. People like Nancy Mace, who always has done the right thing, but did sometimes. Certainly Jamie Herrera Butler being a very good example in Washington State. People who stuck their neck out there to stand up for the rule of law, to stand up for the responsibility they have of a member of Congress to hold the president accountable when the president goes so far as to threaten the nation. Those people, are those that we're really going to seek to reward.
Yeah, I would say on that, there's been some discussion of quote unquote de-Bathification of the Republican Party, which of course is a reference to the policy that the U.S. government had in Iraq to basically clean the Iraqi government out of all the Baathists. The Baathists were the people, of course, who were a member of Saddam Hussein's party, and the thought was all of those people had to go in order for the country to get back on its feet and have a future of self-government and justice and freedom. And so the idea, and that is generally perceived these days to be a mistake, because basically a lot of people in the government were a part of the Ba'ath Party because they felt like they had to be, and not because they chose to be. I think it's a little bit different with Republicans in Congress. They all made their decisions about how they were going to behave over the last 4 years, and frankly, we all know that many of them did not pass the basic test of leadership. They didn't speak truth. They didn't stand up to gross abuses by the president, and all of that is very disappointing. But I think it's unrealistic to imagine that we're going to replace all of them. It's just not realistic. It's not a realistic path forward for the country, for the party. But I do think if you participated in the insurrection, if you encouraged it, if you facilitated it in any way, you need to be replaced. You need to be held accountable. If you broke the law, you need to face charges for those violations. Those who participated in the big lie and voted against certifying the election, those people too, I think, some more than others, they all have a lot of explaining to do. Some of them, many of them will need to be held accountable. There's another set that has just been quiet really over the last 4 years, and when push came to shove, finally in this final moment of truth of our democracy, they voted to uphold the election. Those are people in particular who I think we ought to be trying, and we are, to talk to those people, to find common ground and urge them to lead in a new direction and to support them in doing that. And I think we can do that. But we should be clear, that's not going to work with everybody. If you were a major facilitator, enabler of Trump over the last 4 years, and if you if you participated or inspired or facilitated that insurrection, you've got to be held accountable, either politically or from a legal perspective. And there just can be no compromise on that. But I think we ought to look for common ground and hope that people are now turning to their better angels. But again, if not, then we have elections to hold them accountable for it.
This is fantastic. And to your point, I echo your sentiments, both Evan and Mindy, on this. Now we've got time for one last question, and then we're going to wrap up, which is really sad because there's just so many fantastic questions. But I wanted to ask, the question comes from Misty, and she wants to know what can be done to keep conservative values alive during the Biden presidency. And the second half, which is another question, I'm just going to quick sneak in here, comes from Christina, who says that she's finding herself disconnected from the process and wants to be more actively involved, engaged in the government process, and how she can basically help. So basically, what, Evan, is your suggestion to getting people involved and how to keep the values and putting their principles over party during the next 4 years and beyond?
Yeah, well, great questions. I mean, so many great questions. I think how to stay involved. First of all, is the important thing is to realize that you can have a big impact, and you may be discouraged because you don't know that many people, or you don't have that big of a reach, or you feel like you have no voice. Don't underestimate yourself. You do have a voice. You do matter. You matter, first of all, in your sphere of influence. People are tuning out political ads in many cases these days, but they are listening to their friends. And so what you say in your own sphere of influence matters a lot. And I think part of the problem over the last 4 years, one of the reasons why we've gotten into this crazy space that we find ourselves in now, or certainly a week ago, 2 weeks ago, was that many good people out there decided just not to speak the truth and speak on behalf of decency over the last 4 years. The first step, I guess, is what I'm saying is, have a voice within your sphere of influence. Be polite. Be respectful of all. But have a voice, and you're doing that. That is the most patriotic thing you can do. You may pay a personal price for it. You may lose some friends. But you're sacrificing for the country, and that is a patriotic act if there ever was one. And so I would encourage you on that front. The other thing I would say is, get involved with groups. Stand Up Republic. I would encourage you to be more involved with Stand Up Republic. In the past, we've held Hill Days where people have flown into DC and met with members of Congress to advance reforms that are critical to the Republic. We didn't do that in this last year because of the pandemic, but I think this year we'll likely just do it virtually, because now meetings with Congress are happening often virtually. And so that's what we'll do. So, you may not have been able to fly into DC to participate in, all those meetings we've had with Congress over the last few years, but you can participate if it's virtual. And so I would invite you to that. Also, organizations, Stand Up Republic, we put out calls to action and ask you to write letters and call your representatives and senators. That's a big deal, and I know because I spent time on the Hill, and we would count the number of letters or calls we would get for one issue or the other issue, and for and pro and con and all of that. They're listening, at least on the macro level. And so you can have that impact. But you can have an outsized impact, I think, by working with a civic organization that is creating opportunities for you to take action. And so we would certainly encourage you to get engaged with Stand Up Republic. The other thing I would say is get engaged with your local chapter. We've got we've got over 20 chapters around the country. We may not have one in your state. If we don't have one, reach out to us and say, hey, maybe you could start the chapter, and it can start very small, just a few people. But we've seen our state leaders and state organizations have done tremendous things over the last 4 years, had a huge impact on the future of the country through their activities. And trust me, you can do the same. And it may not be right for you to lead a state chapter, but there'll be other things that you can do. But reach out to us through our website and through any other means, and volunteer, and we'll plug you in and get you involved. But But I assure you that you can have a huge impact, much more than you think you can.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just that I say it has been really amazing to watch and just so encouraging and inspiring to see Stand Up Republic members, state leaders, and others over the last 4 years make an impact, locally. I mean, we have state leaders now who are regularly, have regularly published op-eds in their papers of record. For example, they weren't somebody who held some major political role in the past. They were people like, any of us who just going about their lives, but following politics, caring a lot about our democracy and the health of our country and the health of their state and community. And they had things to say. And, we're happy to work with people on op-eds to try to get them into shape and optimize them to get published. We do that regularly. Some people really don't need that at this point. And it's always really incredible to see that their voice is being amplified, through that media. There's people clearly doing TV interviews and radio interviews, not to mention just organizing their community through their chapter and through social media and their email lists and making calls whenever, we put out those calls to action. So there is so much that you can do to get involved. We really do encourage you to get involved in Stand Up Republic, and we want to hear from you and hear what your priorities are, where you're most interested in focusing. To the question on kind of the Biden administration, I think I would just say this, which is, I think there's probably people on this call, it runs the spectrum, how much people agree with everything the Biden administration will do from a policy perspective. But I do think it is really important that, we come from a place of of being constructive. I think for many people, what has come to define a lot of the Republican Party is just, they get their energy in just being opposition and opposing and criticizing and tearing down anything the political opposition is doing. And that came to define politics, too much. And I think something Evan brought up earlier is that there is, perhaps if you can look for a silver lining in what happened in January 6th with the insurrection, and that we see kind of the worst occasions and this divisive, fear-based, fear-driven politics. It's really time to shift that model from polarizing and polarization to problem solving. And so problem solving doesn't mean just going along to get along and agreeing with everything that the administration does. I think all of us would find things that we could disagree with. It does mean using our voice to be constructive about what we think a better solution is. That, maybe we might agree with the intent. We might agree with parts of the solution, but there might be tweaks or aspects of it that we think should be different. That's important. That debate about ideas and policies and solutions, competition and a free-flowing debate is critically important. It's part of democracy. I mean, we won't have a healthy democracy if we don't have that debate. So, we do encourage, participation, and part of that participation may mean, disagreeing. I think at times for a lot of you, it will involve disagreeing. I think what we would encourage, though, is yes, use your voice, but think about using your voice in a constructive way. Use your voice in a way that is, really about kind of reflecting a different perspective and the views of community, but with an eye towards finding points of agreement first, and then and then identifying and discussing where you disagree and why you think something's wrong, making an evidence-based case and offering an even better solution. With that kind of innovative, collaborative spirit, I think that is when we can have confidence that we're getting our country back on track.
Yeah, I think that's so true, Mindy. And there was a question in there also about, how do we preserve conservatism? Those of us in this cross-partisan coalition who are conservatives, how do we preserve conservative ideals during the Biden administration? Look, the word conservatism has been really redefined by Trump and Trumpism over the last 4 years, which is unfortunate because for me, that's never what it meant. I mean, I've been a conservative my entire life, affiliated with the Republican Party until 2016. And, then they've sort of pushed me away, and I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm hopeful that the party, for the sake of the country, will regain or gain sanity and head in a positive direction. But part of the fight right now is ensuring that conservatism is defined in a healthy way. For me, conservatism has always been about, and it's a personality trait too. When I go hiking or climbing, I'm always the guy that says, "Oh, maybe we shouldn't do that." And part of that comes from, my service in the CIA. I feel like I took too many risks, and so now I got to be more careful. But I'm just conservative by nature. I want to preserve more than take massive risks at times these days. But for me, conservatism has always meant that we are committed to conserving our foundational values, because they're just essential to everything in our country: our prosperity, our security, our unity. Everything comes from our values. It's not a trite, platitude. It's truth. Everything starts with our values. And so, talking about how to preserve conservatism, I think the most important thing we can do, for those of us who affiliate with that word, and not all of us do, and that's fine, but for those of us who do, the most important thing we can do is to stand up and say what we think conservatism is. And it has to be, at the most basic level, a commitment to preserving our broader national commitment to our values and to other things like truth, justice for all, liberty and justice for all, our democracy, this democratic republic, self-governance, whatever word you want to use. That's what we have to be about conserving. And then we can talk about other things, and you can get into more traditional conservative policies and whatnot. But if it doesn't start with the commitment to our values, then it's not going to be a good thing, and it's not going to be competitive politically in the long term. And if it is, it'll be dangerous. So that's where it has to start. So that's the fight. If you're a conservative and you're interested in preserving that word and making it mean something healthy and productive and patriotic again, then start with our foundational ideals as Americans that we all share, or should. And that's going to serve conservatism and the country and the GOP and even the Democratic Party best.
Thank you guys so much. And I don't know about you all watching at home, but I am so fired up. Evan and Mindy, thank you for answering the questions. Thank you to everyone that submitted questions. We didn't get to all of them, but I assure you that we did see them all, and we thought they were fantastic. So, one thing I want to encourage everyone that's watching to visit our website, standuprepublic.com. That's where you can stay up to date with everything that we're doing. You can find calls to action for those of you that want to reach out to your elected officials. We also we're on Facebook. If you're watching on Facebook, thank you for liking our page. If you haven't done so, you can like us at facebook.com/standuprepublic. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @StandUpRepublic, and you can also find us on Instagram @StandUpRepublic. Thank you guys for joining us, and thank you to Evan and Mindy for taking time out of your evening to answer some of the questions and talk about the way forward as we look ahead to 2021 and beyond, and what the future of Stand Up Republic and American democracy looks like for everyone here. I hope you have a fantastic night, and we'll see you very soon.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Be well. Stay safe. Bye-bye.